really in three distinct parts. Firstly, we're going to try and cover off a bit of the legislation. Next, we're going to cover off the tool that we've got that can help you meet your obligations under this new legislation. And then finally, we'll have a session on questions. Okay. But I wanted to kick off, if you don't mind, with a little bit of a preamble. And that is just to explain, well, what is it that qualifies me, Basil Jackson, to speak to you about this subject at all? Well, my background, and I ought to explain, I do not have a legal background. I am not somebody you can speak to about the legislation in any sort of detail, because I am not from that sort of background. I am an engineer. My first degree is in civil engineering, and I've been dealing in buildings, the built environment for many, many decades. As you can see, I'm knocking on now, but I like to refer to my age now as experience rather than age. Okay, so I've specialised in a number of areas. So on top of the degree in civil engineering, I've also got a degree in fire engineering. And the thing that I'm trying to get across to you is I've had to keep up with the changes in the legislation around buildings, because it's just been my life up until now. And that's what my profession has been focused on. Okay, so that's what, if you like, qualifies me to be able to speak to you about this. So I'm a chartered engineer through the Engineering Council as a civil engineer, but I'm also a chartered engineer through the Engineering Council as a fire engineer, and I'm a chartered building engineer as well. So I'm as qualified as you can be talk to you about buildings and anything related to fire and how buildings are put together, etc. Okay, so on that note, I'm going to now share my screen, and maybe if we can start to give you my presentation. Let me just see if I can start this off. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to cover off the legislation to start off with, and then I'm going to go into the tool that we have to assist you with meeting your obligations. But I want to explain to you that, in the UK, generally the way that we develop new policies and legislation as it relates to fire is based on the experience that we have of major fire events. And so since 1666, I think that was the Great Fire of London, 1666, we have brought in legislation to make sure that our built environment is as it should be and is safe for people who are out and about in the built environment and using our buildings, etc. And that has been the case, like I say, since 1666. And you might say to yourself, well, you should have learned by now. You should have got everything sorted by now. And I think that's a valid criticism. But the truth of the matter is that there's something else that changes along with the need to change with the legislation. And that is building practices, the way we put buildings together, the materials that we're using to put buildings together has developed. And because of that, we've had to learn retrospectively from events, major fire events, as those new building techniques are used and as new materials are used on buildings. Okay. So let's just talk about legislation. Oops, daisy. Why can't I seem to move on? Typical. Right, okay. Now, the first bit of legislation I want to quickly cover off is one that people don't talk about very often, and that's the Fire Safety Act 2021. Now, that's a significant bit of legislation, and I don't know if you realise that it wasn't until fairly recently that we were very clear about who was responsible for the external walls of buildings under legislation and who was responsible for the front doors of flats. Because a building owner would say, well, hang on a second, I don't own the front door of a flat. That's owned by the occupier, the owner of the flat. And I can't start doing things to his or her door. It's their private door. And the external wall, well, the external wall is used by a number of people that live in the building. So how can I be responsible in any way for those features of the building? Well, the Fire Safety Act came in and made it absolutely crystal clear that the responsible person, the person that has responsibility for the building as a whole, also has responsibility for checking the fire safety of external walls and front doors of flats. And what it's basically saying is that that responsible person has got to make sure that anyone that's occupying that building is safe to occupy it, given the external walls and how they've been put together, and given the front doors, how they've been checked. Okay, so that bit of legislation, just be aware that it's there, and it's the bit of legislation that requires you to do your FRA EWs. I don't know if you've come across these external wall assessments and the EWS1 forms. That's where all of that comes from. Okay, it's the Fire Safety Act, and nothing to do with the legislation that we're going to focus on in a bit. Okay, so I'm hoping that you understand the Fire Safety Act 2021 and why it's there, because it's an important bit of legislation for anybody who owns a building or has responsibility for a building. So then we come to the Building Safety Act 2022, and this is really where I think a lot of confusion is occurring, or at least I think there's a lack of knowledge about what people are required to do. So the first thing I want to just bring to your attention is this, that before October 2023, if you had a building that was above 18 metres, above 7 stories, and it was a residential building, you could have gone to a building control authority of your choice. You could have gone to the local authority, or you could have gone to a private approved inspector. And you could choose from a range of these companies that are out there. And you can say, I want AIS, or whatever they're called, to do my building control function on my building. The law has changed now and basically says if you've got a building that is what we call a high-rise building, or HRB, you'll see that acronym quite often now. If it's a high-rise building, a building that's above 18 metres or above 7 stories, then you don't have the choice anymore. The Building Control Authority is now the Building Safety Regulator. And the Building Safety Regulator is housed, if you like, with the HSC at the moment. Okay, so the Building Safety Regulator, if your building is over 18 metres, there's no question about it, it is the Building Safety Regulator. So to be clear, you can no longer choose who your building control body is if you have a building that's over 18 metres. And if your building is a residential building, or if it's a hospital or a care home or a hotel, you must register that with the Building Control Authority. And that is the Building Safety Regulator.